From her first day in the compound, Amara had felt the wrongness in the air, like the stillness before a storm. She watched Adewale carve his magnificent patterns, his face peaceful despite the pain that sometimes flickered in his eyes. She watched Folasade move through the compound like a beautiful whirlwind, her discontent preceding her like a smell. Amara kept her eyes down and her mouth closed, as a good maid should. But she kept her ears open, and her spirit troubled. She heard Folasade's complaints to her friends who visited. "Ah, my sister, you don't know my suffering. To be tied to a man who cannot even stand to greet guests properly. I, who could have married the chief's son." She saw how Folasade would accidentally place things just out of Adewale's reach, then sigh dramatically when he asked for help. She witnessed the way Folasade would mimic her husband's awkward movements when she thought no one was watching, her beautiful face twisted in mocking cruelty. But Amara had been raised properly. She knew that a maid does not interfere in the marriages of her employers. She fetched water, ground pepper, swept the compound, and tried to make herself invisible. Yet at night, lying on her mat in the small room off the kitchen, she would whisper prayers to her grandmother's spirit. "Mama," she would say to the darkness, "if you can hear me in the land of ancestors, watch over the master of this house. There is evil brewing here, and I am too small to stop it." If her grandmother's spirit answered, it was in the language of dreams that dissolve with morning light. The day it happened was a market day, the 5th day of the Yoruba week, sacred to the Orisha of wealth and prosperity. The sun rose hot and certain, burning away the cool mercy of dawn within hours. The air itself seemed to shimmer with heat and tension. Folasade woke in a foul mood, though she could not have said why. Perhaps it was the dream she'd had of walking alone on an endless road. Perhaps it was the way the morning light showed new lines around her eyes in her mirror, evidence that time and bitterness were beginning to mark even her perfect face. Perhaps it was simply that the poison in her heart had reached its fullness and needed to spill out. She called for Amara to bring her water for bathing, and it was not hot enough. She demanded her breakfast, and the pepper in the eggs was too much. She asked for her best wrapper to be brought, and somehow it was the wrong one, though Amara had selected the exact one she pointed to. "Useless girl," Folasade snapped. "Can you do nothing right?" "I am sorry, Ma," Amara said quietly, her head bowed. "I will bring the other wrapper." Adewale sat in his chair in the courtyard, already at work on a new carving, a door panel commissioned by a wealthy family in the neighboring town. His hands moved with sure grace over the wood, coaxing out the image of a wise tortoise counseling the other animals. His face was calm, though Amara could see the tightness around his mouth that meant his legs were paining him more than usual today. "Wife," he called out gently when he heard Folasade's voice raised in the interior rooms, "is everything well?" The question was his mistake. Folasade emerged from the house like a storm given human form. She had wrapped her cloth but not yet tied her headscarf, and her hair stood in the twists she'd set the night before. In the heat of her anger, with her beauty somewhat diminished by rage and disarray, she looked like what she was becoming, a woman being consumed from within. "Well," she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You ask me if everything is well? Sit there on your chair like a king on a throne and ask me about wellness." Adewale's hands stilled on the wood. Amara, emerging with the wrapper, froze in the doorway, her spirit suddenly alert with terrible anticipation. "Folasade," Adewale said, his voice still gentle, still patient, that infinite patience that made Amara's heart ache and Folasade's rage burn hotter. "What troubles you this morning? Tell me, and if I can help, I will." "Help?" Folasade laughed, and it was not a sound of joy. "Help? What help can you give me, you half-man? You sit there day after day, useless as a broken pot, carving your little pictures while I must manage everything. I must speak to the traders, deal with the villagers, carry the dignity of this household on my shoulders alone." The words fell into the compound like stones into still water. Even the chickens pecking in the dirt seemed to pause. Adewale's face did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a deeper hurt than physical pain could cause. "My wife," he said quietly, "I know my condition is a burden. But I work with my hands. I provide." "Provide?" Folasade interrupted, her voice rising to a pitch that carried beyond their compound walls. Neighbors working in their own courtyards turned their heads, though they pretended not to listen. "You call this providing? Sitting like a woman grinding corn, playing with wood while your legs lie dead beneath you." Amara felt her hands begin to tremble. The wrapper slipped from her fingers to the ground, but neither Adewale nor Folasade noticed. The air itself seemed to thicken, to press down with warning weight. Every day, Folasade continued, pacing now, her bare feet slapping against the swept earth. Every day I must look at you and remember what you were. Remember the man who danced, who climbed, who stood straight and tall. Now look at you, crooked as a bent nail, useful as a... She paused, searching for the cruelest comparison, and her eyes fell on Amara, standing frozen in the doorway. And that is when Folasade made her fatal mistake. She smiled, a terrible smile, and turned to Amara directly. "Girl," she commanded, "come here. Stand before your master." Amara's grandmother's blood sang a warning in her veins, but she obeyed, moving slowly into the courtyard. The sun beat down mercilessly. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed, though it was hours past dawn. "Tell me, Amara," Folasade said, her voice dripping with poisoned honey, "when you look at this man who sits before you, what do you see? Do you see a husband worthy of respect? Do you see a man who can protect his household?" "Folasade," Adewale said, his voice low with warning, "do not do this." But the demon of pride had fully possessed Folasade now. She grabbed Amara's shoulder and turned her to face Adewale directly. "Look at him," Folasade demanded. "Look at those useless legs. Look at the mighty Adewale, brought so low he cannot even stand to greet the sunrise properly. This is what I am bound to, this half-man, this broken thing, this." The word she used next is not one that should be repeated in decent company. It was a word that stripped away dignity, that reduced a human being to something less than the dust beneath feet. The moment she spoke it, the world held its breath. Amara gasped and stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes, not for herself, but for the profound wrongness she felt crack through the very air. Adewale's face became like stone. Not angry stone, but the stone of ancient monuments that have weathered storms beyond counting. He looked at his wife with eyes that seemed suddenly older than his years, eyes that held both immense sadness and something else, something almost like pity. "Folasade," he said, so quietly that she had to stop her ranting to hear him, "you have just crossed a line that the ancestors themselves guard. You have humiliated your husband before a witness. You have broken the sacred bond of respect that even enemies observe. And you have done so on a market day, when the spirits walk among us listening." For just a moment, something flickered in Folasade's eyes, perhaps fear, perhaps the last glimmer of the woman she had been before bitterness devoured her. But pride is a powerful master. "The ancestors," she scoffed, though her voice was not quite as steady as before. "Let the ancestors judge me then. Let them see what I endure. Let them." She never finished the sentence. The sky, which had been mercilessly clear all morning, suddenly darkened. A wind rose from nowhere, whipping dust and leaves into spirals. The carved animals on Adewale's panel seemed to move in the dancing shadows. And from the ancient Iroko tree that grew at the edge of their compound, there came a sound, deep, resonant, impossible to explain. The ancestors had heard. And they were about to answer. In your own family or community, what are the boundaries of respect that should never be crossed, even in anger? What wisdom have your elders taught you about the power of words to harm or heal? The wind that rose was not a natural wind. It carried no scent of rain, no promise of relief from the heat. Instead, it seemed to pull at the very soul, cold despite the blazing sun, raising goosebumps on flesh and spirits alike. Amara dropped to her knees instinctively, her grandmother's blood recognizing what her young mind could barely comprehend. The ancestors were present, and they were not pleased. Folasade stumbled backward, her eyes wide, her earlier bravado crumbling like termite-eaten wood. What is this?" Adewale remained still in his chair, but his hands had moved from his carving to rest upon his motionless legs. His lips moved in silent prayer, whether of protection or acceptance, only he and the spirits knew. The Iroko tree's leaves rustled though the wind had already died down. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the strange moment passed. The sun blazed on. The chickens resumed their pecking. The world returned to its ordinary rhythms. But nothing was ordinary anymore. "Foolish woman," Adewale said softly, his voice heavy with sorrow. "You have invited judgment into our home." Folasade laughed, but it was a shaky sound, brittle as old bones. "You try to frighten me with superstition?" There was just wind. A sudden breeze. Nothing more. Yet even as she spoke, her hand crept to the amulet at her throat, the protection charm her mother had given her on her wedding day, which she hadn't thought about in months. Amara slowly rose to her feet, her body trembling. "Ma," she whispered, "please, you should apologize. You should pour libation. You should be silent." Folasade snapped. "Back to your work. Both of you, stop looking at me as if I've committed murder." So I spoke harshly to my husband. Is that not a wife's right when she is frustrated? A wife's right is to honor her husband, Adewale said, his voice still quiet but firm as iron. As a husband's duty is to honor his wife. We have both the earthly laws and the spiritual laws to guide us, and you have broken both today. I have broken nothing. Folasade shouted, but her voice echoed strangely in the compound, as if the walls themselves rejected her words. She wrapped her arms around herself despite the heat. I am going to the market. Amara, finish preparing my things. And you. She looked at Adewale, and for a moment, her face twisted with something that might have been regret. But pride seized her tongue again. You just sit there and carve your wood. It's all you're good for anyway. She turned and swept back into the house, but Amara noticed that her steps were not quite as confident as before. By the time Folasade reached the great market of Abeokuta, the sun stood at its highest point, pouring heat like palm oil from the sky. The market was a riot of color and sound, women in brilliant wrappers haggling over yams and dried fish, traders calling out their wares, children weaving through the crowd, the smell of roasting plantains mixing with spices and sweat and life itself. Normally, Folasade loved the market. It was where her beauty could be displayed, where other women's envious glances fed her pride, where traders gave her preferential treatment hoping for her smile. But today, something was wrong. She couldn't quite identify what it was at first. The market looked the same, sounded the same, but felt different. "Ah, Folasade," called Mama Ido, a cloth trader who usually fawned over her. Come see my new fabrics from the coastal traders." Folasade approached the stall, ready to examine the beautiful cloths displayed like rainbows across the wooden frame. But as she reached out to touch a particularly lovely indigo wrapper, Mama Ido suddenly gasped and pulled back. "What is it?" Folasade asked, irritated. Mama Ido's eyes were fixed on Folasade's hand. Your fingers, child. Do they pain you?" Folasade looked down at her own hand, the hand that had pointed so cruelly at her husband, that had gestured so mockingly at his condition, and her blood ran cold. The fingers were darkened, as if stained with something. Not dirt, but something that seemed to come from within the skin itself, like shadows bleeding through. It's just dirt from the compound," Folasade stammered, pulling her hand back and trying to rub the darkness away. But it didn't fade. If anything, it seemed to darken further. "Perhaps you should see the herbalist," Mama Ido suggested, her voice carefully neutral. But Folasade could see the way the older woman's eyes shifted, the way she took a small step backward. Folasade wrapped her wrapper more tightly around herself, hiding her hands in its folds. "It's nothing. Just a reaction to some dye. It will wash off." She hurried away from the stall, her heart beating too fast. Around her, the market seemed to have changed. Or perhaps it was the same, and she was the one who was different. Conversations seemed to pause as she passed. Eyes followed her with expressions she couldn't quite read. A small child pointed at her and said something to her mother, who quickly hushed her and turned away. They can't know, Folasade thought frantically. They can't possibly know what happened this morning. News doesn't travel that fast. But in a village, news travels on wings invisible and swift as thought. More than that, some things don't need words to be communicated. The spiritual realm has its own way of marking those who have transgressed its laws. Folasade tried to continue her marketing, but the wrongness followed her like a shadow. At the yam seller's stall, the elderly woman who always gave her the best tubers took one look at Folasade and made a quick sign of protection. I have sold all my yams today," the woman lied, though her baskets were clearly still half full. At the palm oil stall, the trader's child, a boy of perhaps 6 years, looked directly at Folasade and said in that brutally honest way of children, "Mama, why does that woman have darkness around her?" "Hush," his mother said sharply, pulling him close. She wouldn't meet Folasade's eyes. By the time Folasade reached the center of the market, where the old baobab tree provided shade and the elders often sat to settle disputes, she was sweating not from heat but from fear. Her hands, both of them now, were definitely darker. And something else was happening. Her beautiful skin, which she had pampered with shea butter and oils, felt rough to the touch, almost scaly. No, she whispered to herself. No, this is not real. This is my imagination. The sun is too hot. I am unwell. I need water. She approached the water seller, a young woman named Key Hind, who had always been friendly to her. Sister Key Hind, Folasade called out, her voice not quite steady. Please, I need water. Key Hind turned, and her face, usually so open and smiling, changed. Her eyes widened, not with malice but with something worse, pity mixed with fear. Folasade, Key Hind said slowly, when last did you look at your reflection? What? Why would you ask such a... There is a water basin here, Key Hind interrupted, gesturing to the large clay pot where she kept her drinking water. Look. With trembling hands, Folasade approached the basin. The water was still and clear as a mirror. And in that mirror, she saw what everyone else had been seeing. Her face, her beautiful, perfect face, was changing. The darkness that had started on her hands was creeping up her arms like vines. Her skin, which had been smooth as polished wood, now showed patches of roughness. And her eyes held something behind them, something that looked like shadows moving. Folasade screamed. The market fell silent. Every eye turned to her. And in that moment of perfect quiet, a voice spoke, ancient, neither male nor female, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Folasade, daughter of traders, wife of Adewale, you have been weighed and found wanting. The voice seemed to come from the baobab tree itself, from the earth beneath their feet, from the air they breathed. You who mocked the afflicted, you shall know affliction. You who stripped dignity from another, you shall have your own stripped away. You who saw only the outer form and not the inner worth, you shall learn what it means to be judged by appearance alone. Folasade fell to her knees in the red dust of the market. Around her, people backed away, forming a circle. Some faces showed satisfaction. She had been proud, and the proud always fall. Others showed compassion. They had been where she was now, or feared they might be someday. Please, Folasade whispered, tears beginning to stream down her changing face. Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. You meant every word, the voice said, and it was terrible in its certainty. The ancestors do not punish for accidents or slips of the tongue. They punish when the heart's true poison finally spills from the lips. Your words today were the harvest of seeds you have planted in your spirit for seasons upon seasons. What is happening to me? Folasade sobbed. An old woman pushed through the crowd, Mama Agba, the eldest of the market women, a woman so old she remembered when the current Oba's grandfather was crowned. She looked at Folasade with eyes that had seen much and judged little. Child, Mama Agba said, her voice cracked but kind, you have been marked by the ancestors. This is the beginning of a transformation. Whether it leads to your destruction or your redemption depends entirely on what you do next. But I didn't do anything so terrible. Folasade protested, even as part of her knew she lied. I just spoke harshly to my husband. Wives do that. It's normal. Mama Agba shook her head slowly. There is a difference between the anger of a moment and the cruelty of a spirit. You did not just speak harshly. You humiliated. You mocked affliction. You turned suffering into entertainment. And you did it in front of a witness, making it not just a private sin but a public shame. The old woman knelt down beside Folasade with difficulty, her old knees cracking like dry wood. Tell me true, child, she said softly. Has this been the first time? Or have you been feeding this demon in your heart for many moons? Folasade wanted to lie. But under Mama Agba's gaze, under the weight of the supernatural moment, under the watching eyes of the entire market, the truth came tumbling out. I was so angry when he fell, she whispered. So angry. He was supposed to be perfect. He was supposed to give me the perfect life. And then he became human. Mama Agba supplied. Vulnerable, in need of compassion rather than able to provide you with endless strength. Folasade nodded miserably. The tears fell faster now, and where they touched her darkening skin, they left tracks like small rivers carving through drought-hardened earth. I have been cruel, she admitted. Not just today. For many days. Many, many days. I thought if I showed him my disappointment, he would somehow, I don't know. I don't know what I thought. You thought he would magically become who he was before, Mama Agba said. But child, none of us remain who we were before. Time and fate change everyone. The only question is whether we meet those changes with grace or with bitterness. What do I do? Folasade asked desperately. How do I stop this? Mama Agba stood slowly, using her walking stick for support. The ancestors have set you on a path. You must walk it to its end. Go home. Face your husband. And prepare yourself. The transformation has only just begun. Folasade walked home through streets that seemed both familiar and strange. People stepped out of her path now, not with respect, but with unease. Children stared openly until their parents pulled them inside. Dogs barked at her passage, and even the goats scattered as she approached. By the time she reached her compound, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire. The gates stood open, as they always did during daylight hours, but they seemed to Folasade like the entrance to a judgment hall. She paused at the threshold, gathering what remained of her courage. Through the gateway, she could see into the courtyard. Adewale was still there, still in his chair, but he was no longer carving. Instead, he sat very still, his hands folded in his lap, his face turned toward the sky as if listening to something only he could hear. Amara was sweeping the compound, but her movements were mechanical, distracted. Every few moments, she would glance at Adewale with an expression of deep concern. Folasade took a breath and stepped through the gate. Both Adewale and Amara turned to look at her. Amara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Adewale's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes. Was it sorrow? Pity? Perhaps even a touch of grim satisfaction at cosmic justice, made Folasade want to weep. So, Adewale said quietly, the ancestors have spoken. Folasade stood in the center of her own courtyard, feeling more exposed than if she had been naked. The darkness had spread further up her arms and across her shoulders. Her skin felt tight and foreign on her bones. When she spoke, even her voice sounded different, rougher, harder. Husband, she said, and the word felt strange in her mouth, as if she was using it properly for the first time in many moons. I need help. Do you? Adewale asked. Interesting. I have needed help every day since my fall. I wonder if you remember how you responded to that need. The words were quiet, but they landed like stones. Folasade flinched. I was wrong, she whispered. I know I was wrong. Please, you must know a Babalawo, an herbalist, someone who can stop this. Adewale was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was not angry, but it was firm. Folasade, do you know the proverb, the chicken that will grow into a cock can be spotted the very day it hatches? Your cruelty did not begin today. It has been growing for seasons. What happened in this courtyard this morning was just the final fruit of seeds you planted long ago. But I apologized. Folasade said, though even as she spoke, she realized she hadn't actually apologized, not truly. She had explained, justified, asked for help. But apologized? Taken true responsibility for her actions? Did you? Adewale asked. Or did you just become frightened when you faced consequences? Amara had set down her broom and stood watching, her young face troubled. In her spirit, she felt the weight of what was unfolding, a teaching moment not just for Folasade, but for the entire village. This was how the ancestors worked, turning individual failures into collective lessons. Master, Amara said softly, forgive me for speaking, but perhaps we should send for the Babalawo? Whatever is happening to the mistress, it is beyond ordinary understanding. Adewale nodded. You are right, Amara. Go and fetch Ifagbemi. Tell him what has occurred. But... He paused, looking directly at Folasade. Know this, I suspect the Babalawo will tell us what I already know. This is not a curse that can be lifted by herbs or charms. This is a teaching. After Amara hurried out, Folasade and Adewale were alone in the courtyard. The silence stretched between them like the Sahara Desert, vast, uncomfortable, impossible to cross without great effort. Are you pleased? Folasade finally asked, a spark of her old defiance flaring. To see me brought low? To see me suffering? Adewale's face softened. No, wife. I am not pleased. I am heartbroken. Do you know why? Folasade shook her head, not trusting her voice. Because, Adewale said, I loved you. I still love you, though you have given me every reason not to. And it pains me to see you suffering not because of fate or accident, but because of choices you made. When I fell from that palm tree, I had no choice in my affliction. But you? You chose cruelty. You chose mockery. You chose pride. And now you must choose what comes next. What comes next? Folasade repeated. You speak as if I have choices. Look at me. She held up her darkening hands. Look at what's happening. I am being transformed into I don't know what. What choice do I have? Every choice, Adewale said simply. The greatest choice of all, how you will face this trial. With humility or with continued pride. With genuine repentance or with self-pity. With openness to learning or with resistance to the lesson. He shifted in his chair, and Folasade saw him wince as pain shot through his legs, pain he felt every day but rarely showed. When I lost the use of my legs, he continued, I had to choose. Would I become bitter? Angry at the world? Would I take out my pain on those around me? Or would I find new meaning, new purpose, new ways to be useful and whole despite my limitation? But you're you, Folasade said. You're strong. Patient. Good. I'm not. I'm not like that. You could be, Adewale said. You were, once. I remember the woman I married. Yes, she was proud, but she was also capable of joy, of kindness, of seeing beyond herself. That woman is still in there, Folasade, buried under layers of disappointment and bitterness. Perhaps this. He gestured to her changing form. Perhaps this is the ancestors' way of stripping away those layers. Not to destroy you, but to help you find yourself again. Folasade sank to the ground, no longer caring that the red dust would stain her wrapper. She looked at her hands, these hands that had once been her pride, that she had adorned with henna and rings, that she had used to point and mock and push away love. I don't know how, she whispered. I don't know how to be different. Neither did I, Adewale admitted. When I first woke up after the fall and realized my legs would not move, I wanted to die. I prayed for death. I cursed the ancestors, the tree, the world itself. Ask Amara's predecessor, who fled this household because she couldn't bear my rage in those early days. Folasade looked up in surprise. She had never known this. But slowly, Adewale continued, with the help of the Babalawo, the elders, and yes, even my wife who was not yet disappointed in me, I learned. I learned that a man is not his legs. I learned that there are many ways to stand tall. I learned that dignity comes not from what your body can do, but from how your spirit responds to what your body cannot do. And now I must learn what you learned, Folasade said slowly, understanding dawning like unwelcome sunrise. Yes, Adewale said. But your lesson is different from mine. Mine was about accepting limitation. Yours is about seeing worth beyond appearance, about finding compassion, about understanding that every person, no matter how they look, how they move, what they can or cannot do, carries the divine spark of creation within them. Before Folasade could respond, voices approached from outside the compound. Amara returned, and with her came Ifugbemi the Babalawo, a wizened man whose age was impossible to guess, whose eyes saw into realms beyond the physical. He carried his divining tray and his sacred implements. But when he saw Folasade, he stopped at the compound entrance and slowly shook his head. The ancestors have already spoken clearly, he said. There is no divination needed here. The message is written on her very skin. Can you help her? Amara asked. Ifugbemi approached Folasade slowly, examining her with eyes that saw more than flesh. He made several signs of protection, muttered prayers in the sacred tongue, and finally stood back. What is happening to me? Folasade asked. What am I becoming? The Babalawo's answer would change everything. You are becoming, he said slowly, what you have made others feel. You saw your husband as less than human, as something broken and shameful. Now you will experience what it is to be seen that way. This transformation will continue, daughter, until one of two things happens. What things? Folasade asked desperately. Either you learn true compassion, not pity, not duty, but genuine compassion that sees the divine worth in all beings, regardless of their form or ability, Ifugbemi said. Or. Folasade prompted, though she feared the answer. or the transformation completes, and you become permanently what you are becoming. The ancestors will make physical what was already true in your spirit, a hard, dark thing unable to feel love or give it. Folasade felt the world tilt beneath her. How? How do I learn this compassion? Tell me and I'll do it. Ifagbemi smiled sadly. Compassion cannot be performed like a ritual or swallowed like medicine. It must grow from true understanding. And understanding comes from experience. He turned to Adewale. Your wife's fate is intertwined with yours now, son of this house. How you respond to her in her affliction will be part of her test. Will you mock her as she mocked you? Will you turn away as she turned from you? Or will you show her what she could not show you? Adewale looked at his wife, this woman who had caused him such pain, who had crushed his dignity, who had made his suffering worse with her cruelty. Every practical voice in his head said to let her face this alone, to give her the same compassion she had shown him. But Adewale had learned something in his seasons of suffering. He had learned that the cycle of cruelty must be broken by someone, and sometimes the person who breaks it must be the one who was hurt, not the one who did the hurting. She is my wife, Adewale said simply. In health and in sickness, in beauty and in whatever she is becoming. She showed me no compassion in my affliction, but that does not mean I should show her none in hers. Perhaps that is my test, to give what was not given to me. Ifagbemi nodded approvingly. Spoken like one who has truly learned wisdom. But know this, your compassion alone will not save her. She must do the inner work herself. You can walk beside her on this path, but you cannot walk it for her. The Babalawo prepared to leave, but paused at the gate. One more thing, he said. The transformation will accelerate. By tomorrow's sunset, people will not recognize her as the beautiful Folasade who walked through the market this morning. She will be tested in ways she cannot yet imagine. And when she is at her lowest, when every part of her wants to give in to bitterness and despair, that is when her true choice will come. He looked directly at Folasade. Remember this, daughter, the ancestors do not test us to destroy us. They test us to transform us. But transformation requires death, death of the old self, death of the false self, death of the self built on pride and appearances. Only after that death can the true self be born. With those words, Ifagbemi departed, leaving behind a compound that hummed with tension and unspoken questions. Night was falling now, bringing with it the sounds of the village settling into evening routines. From neighboring compounds came the sounds of families gathering for the evening meal, children being called inside, the day's final conversations. But in Adewale and Folasade's compound, there was only silence broken by Folasade's quiet weeping. Amara, watching from the shadows, felt her grandmother's spirit close, closer than it had been since the old woman's death. And in her mind, she heard words that might have been memory or might have been message. Every great teaching requires great courage, from the teacher, the student, and all those who witness. Be strong, little one. Your role in this story is not yet finished. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Folasade looked at her husband and asked the hardest question she had ever spoken. Will you help me? Even after everything I've done to you, will you help me learn what I need to learn? Adewale's answer would set the course for everything that followed. What would your elders say about this choice Adewale faces? Is it wisdom to help those who have hurt us, or is it foolishness? Where is the line between compassion and allowing ourselves to be continually wounded? The night that followed was unlike any Folasade had ever experienced. She lay on her sleeping mat in the room that had once been her pride, decorated with fine cloths, sweet-smelling herbs hanging from the rafters, her collection of mirrors and jewelry boxes arranged just so. But now, in the flickering light of the oil lamp, everything looked different. The mirror she had gazed into with such satisfaction now seemed to mock her. The jewelry lay useless. What adornment could beautify what she was becoming? Sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the sensation of her skin tightening, changing, as if her very body was rejecting what she had been and struggling to become something else. The darkness had spread across her shoulders and down her back. When she touched her face, that face she had pampered and protected from the harsh sun, the skin felt rough, almost scaly, like the bark of an ancient tree. In the next room, she could hear Adewale's quiet breathing. He had not rejected her. When she had asked for his help, he had simply nodded and said, "We will face this together. But you must do the walking, Folasade. I can hold the lamp, but I cannot take your steps for you." Those words had been both comfort and burden. Now, in the deep hours of night when the spirit world draws closest to the physical realm, Folasade heard something. At first, she thought it was the wind. But no, it was voices. Whispered words that seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the very earth beneath her mat. Pride goes before falling, and falling before wisdom. The calabash that forgets it came from the vine will dry up and crack. She who has no compassion for others will find none for herself. The voices were not cruel, but they were relentless. Each proverb, each ancestral saying, struck her heart like a carefully aimed arrow. And with each one, memories arose unbidden. She remembered the day, 2 moons after Adewale's fall, when he had struggled to move from his sleeping mat to his chair. He had called for her help, and she had sighed so deeply, so dramatically, before responding. She saw it now as if watching a stranger, the impatience in her movements, the way she had practically dropped him into the chair, the comment she had made, every day, the same helplessness. She remembered the time his old friends had come to visit, fellow palm wine tappers who wanted to encourage him. Folasade had served them food but made sure they saw her martyrdom in every gesture. She had sighed, rolled her eyes when she thought they weren't looking, made small comments about the burden she carried. The men had left early, uncomfortable, and they had not returned. She remembered, oh, the ancestors help her. She remembered, the day Adewale had wept. Just once, in all these seasons, she had found him weeping quietly in the courtyard, overcome by pain and grief for his lost mobility. And instead of holding him, instead of offering comfort, she had said, crying won't bring your legs back. You should save your water for something useful. The memory of that moment, the look on his face when she said those words, made Folasade curl into herself on her mat, her own tears coming hot and bitter. What kind of woman had she become? What kind of wife treats her husband's pain as an inconvenience? You are seeing yourself clearly for the first time, came a voice, clearer than the others. This is the first gift of the ancestors, the mirror of truth. Look well, daughter. This is what transformation requires. Dawn came reluctantly, the sun seeming to hesitate before illuminating a world that had shifted in the night. Folasade rose from her mat feeling as if she had aged 10 years in darkness. Her body ached in new ways, and when she looked down at herself, she gasped. The transformation had accelerated, just as Ifagbemi had warned. Her arms were now completely covered in the dark, rough skin. Her legs bore the same marks. When she caught her reflection in the small mirror she had not yet turned away, she barely recognized the face looking back. Her once smooth skin was now mottled and coarse. Her eyes, though still her own, seemed to have sunk deeper into her skull. Her lips, which she had once kept soft with shea butter, were cracked and darkened. She looked like a woman made of shadow and dried earth. Ancestors have mercy, she whispered. A soft knock came at her door. Ma. It was Amara's voice, gentle and tentative. I have brought water for washing. May I enter? Folasade's first instinct was to say no, to hide, to let no one see her like this. But she remembered Ifagbemi's words. She must do the inner work herself. And part of that work, she understood dimly, was accepting help, accepting being seen in her vulnerability. Enter, she said, her voice rough as if the transformation extended even to her throat. Amara came in carrying a clay pot of water and clean cloths. If she was shocked by Folasade's appearance, she hid it well. The girl had been trained in the art of discretion, but more than that, there was a strange calm about her this morning, as if she had been prepared for this moment. Thank you, Amara, Folasade said, and the simple courtesy felt foreign on her tongue. How long had it been since she had thanked this girl? How many times had Amara served her, helped her, worked from dawn to dusk, and received nothing but criticism and commands? Amara set down the water and began to help Folasade wash. Her hands were gentle, her movements careful. She did not flinch from the roughened skin or make any sound of disgust. You are kind to me, Folasade said quietly. Even now. Even after you witnessed what I did yesterday. What I have been doing. Amara paused in her work. Ma, my grandmother used to say, the person who helps you when you are down is more precious than gold, and the person who helps you when you deserve to be down is sent by the ancestors themselves. And which are you? Folasade asked. I am just a maid, Amara replied. But perhaps I am here for a reason larger than either of us understands. There was something in the way she said it that made Folasade look at her more closely. This girl she had barely noticed, had treated as invisible, as a tool to be used. Who was she really? Amara, Folasade asked. How old were you when your grandmother died? 12 seasons, Ma. And she was what did you say before? An oracle. Amara nodded. She could see things. Hear things. The ancestors spoke through her sometimes. Before she died, she told me I had the gift too, but it would sleep until I was needed. A chill ran through Folasade. And now? Now I am needed, Amara said simply. She met Folasade's eyes directly, something she had never done before, always keeping her gaze properly lowered. The ancestors did not bring me to this house by accident, Ma. I am here to witness. To help. To be part of what you must learn. Before Folasade could respond, Adewale's voice called from the courtyard. Wife? Are you able to come out? There are people gathering at our gate. Folasade's stomach clenched with fear. People? What people? The village, Amara said quietly. They have come to see. Word has spread about what happened in the market. They know you have been marked by the ancestors. I cannot face them, Folasade said, panic rising in her chest. I cannot let them see me like this. But you must, Amara said, and there was steel beneath the gentleness now. This is part of your trial. You humiliated your husband before a witness. Now you must face being seen in your own humiliation. Only then will you understand what you did to him. The wisdom coming from this young girl was startling. But Folasade recognized truth when she heard it, even when, especially when, it was uncomfortable. With Amara's help, she dressed in a simple wrapper. There was no point in trying to look beautiful. That time had passed, perhaps forever. Together, they walked out into the courtyard where morning light fell like judgment. At the compound gate, a crowd had indeed gathered. Not the whole village, but enough people to make Folasade's heart pound with dread. She recognized faces, Mama Agba from the market, several of the traders, some of her former friends, neighbors, the curious, the concerned, and yes, those who had come to witness the fall of the proud. Adewale was already there, positioned in his chair near the gate. He had placed himself as a buffer between Folasade and the crowd, a gesture of protection that made her throat tight with emotion. When the people saw her emerge from the house, a collective sound went through the crowd. Some gasped. Some made signs of protection. Some simply stared with the frank, merciless gaze of those witnessing something they have never seen before. Ancestors preserve us, someone whispered. The transformation is complete. Not complete, corrected Mama Agba, who stood at the front of the crowd, leaning on her walking stick. Just beginning. What we see on her skin is only the outside. The real transformation happens within. An elegantly dressed woman stepped forward, one of Folasade's former friends, a woman named Bisela with whom she had once spent afternoons gossiping and comparing jewelry. Bisela's face held a mixture of shock and something that looked uncomfortably like satisfaction. Folasade, Bisela said, her voice carrying full sweetness, we heard what happened in the market. We came to see if you were well. To see if she was well, or to see the spectacle? Adewale asked sharply. Speak truly, Bisela. The ancestors are listening, and they do not like lies. Bisela had the grace to look ashamed. I suppose I wanted to see. To understand. They say you mocked your husband, Folasade. They say you were cruel to him because of his legs, and the ancestors struck you down. They did, Folasade said, forcing the words out. Her voice sounded strange even to her own ears, rougher, deeper. I was cruel. I am being punished. You all have eyes. You can see what I am becoming. But what are you becoming? Asked a young man in the crowd. Are you becoming a demon? A monster? Should we fear you? She is becoming a lesson, came a new voice. The crowd parted, and through them walked Ifagbemi the Babalawo, his staff tapping against the earth with each step. Behind him walked 3 other figures, elders of the village, keepers of wisdom and tradition. The eldest, a man called Baba Ogunlade, spoke with a voice that commanded attention. The ancestors have placed a mark upon this woman. Yes. But not to make her a monster. To teach her, and through her, to teach all of us, what happens when we forget the fundamental laws of humanity. He turned to address the crowd directly. How many of you have mocked someone for their weakness? How many have judged another by their appearance alone? How many have forgotten that every person, no matter their body's condition, carries within them the same divine spark. The crowd grew uncomfortable. Some looked at their feet. Others glanced at each other guiltily. This woman's transformation is visible, Barber Ogunlade continued. But many of you carry transformations just as ugly on the inside, where eyes cannot see. You judge the beggar with sores. You mock the child born with a twisted foot. You whisper about the old woman whose mind has begun to wander. And all of this ugliness you hide beneath beautiful faces and fine clothes. He pointed his staff at Folasade. At least this one's ugliness is honest now. At least what she is becoming on the outside matches what she became on the inside. Can the rest of you say the same? The words fell like a heavy rain, soaking into the crowd's collective consciousness. Folasade stood trembling, both from the exposure and from the strange relief of hearing the truth spoken so plainly. Mama Agba stepped forward. The question now is this: what will Folasade do with her trial? And what will we, her community, do? Will we cast her out, make her suffering worse? Or will we remember that we are all connected, that her fall could be any of our falls, that the ancestors test all of us in different ways? But what if she's dangerous? Someone called out. What if the transformation makes her? Makes her what? Adewale's voice cut through the murmuring. Makes her humble? Makes her understand suffering? Makes her see what she could not see before? He paused, looking at each face in the crowd. My wife caused me great pain. She mocked my condition, humiliated me, treated me as less than human. If anyone has the right to want her cast out, to want her to suffer, it is me. The crowd quieted, waiting. But I have learned something in my seasons of sitting in this chair, Adewale continued. I have learned that suffering can either harden us or soften us. It can make us bitter or make us wise. It can close our hearts or open them. My wife is suffering now, suffering that comes from her own actions, yes, but suffering nonetheless. And I choose to let it soften me, not harden me. I choose to help her through it. Even after what she did to you? Bisola asked, incredulous. Especially after what she did to me, Adewale said. Because I understand what the ancestors are teaching. The cycle of cruelty must be broken by someone. If I respond to her cruelty with cruelty, nothing changes. The ugliness just continues. But if I respond to cruelty with compassion, not because she deserves it, but because it is right, then perhaps something new can grow. Ifagbemi nodded approvingly. Wisdom from the mouth of one who has truly learned. This is why the ancestors chose this household for this teaching. Both husband and wife are being tested, she to learn compassion, he to practice it. The Babalawo turned to the crowd. You are all witnesses to this. What happens in this compound in the coming days will be a teaching for the entire village. Some of you will see it as entertainment. Some will see it as justice. But the wise among you will see it as a mirror, showing you what you might become if you forget that every person, regardless of their form or ability, is worthy of dignity and respect. 3 days passed. 3 days during which Folasade remained mostly in the compound, trying to come to terms with her new reality. The transformation had not progressed further, but neither had it reversed. She existed in a state of suspension, caught between what she had been and what she might become. Amara had become her unexpected companion and guide. The young woman seemed to know things. When Folasade needed silence, when she needed to talk, when she needed to be reminded of why this was happening. My grandmother used to say, Amara told her one evening as they sat in the courtyard, that the ancestors are never cruel, only firm. They discipline because they love, not because they hate. It is hard to feel loved when you are being turned into a monster, Folasade replied bitterly. Are you a monster? Amara asked. Or are you a woman learning to see beyond the skin to what matters beneath? The question haunted Folasade. What did matter beneath the skin? For so long, she had believed that beauty, appearance, the ability to move gracefully through the world, these were what mattered. But Adewale, with his twisted legs and his patient dignity, had more true worth than she had ever possessed with all her beauty intact. On the 4th day, Ifagbemi returned. With him came Barber Ogunlade and Mama Agba. It is time, the Babalawo announced, for the first trial. Folasade's heart sank. Trial? What trial? You must return to the market, Mama Agba said. You must go to the place where you first felt the weight of judgment and learn what it means to be seen. No, Folasade said immediately. I cannot. They will mock me. They will. They will do exactly what you did to your husband, Barber Ogunlade said bluntly. They will stare. They will whisper. They will judge. And you will feel what he felt every time you looked at him with disgust, every time you sighed as if his very presence was a burden. This is cruelty, Folasade protested. No, Adewale said quietly. He had been listening from his chair. This is education. Do you know how many times I wanted to go to the market in these past seasons? How many times I wanted to walk among people, to feel normal, to participate in village life? And do you know why I stopped going? Folasade looked at him, tears beginning to form in her changed eyes. Because every time I went, Adewale continued, I saw pity in some faces and disgust in others. I saw people look at me and see only broken legs, not a whole person. I saw children stare until their parents pulled them away. I heard the whispers, poor Adewale, such a shame, better he had died than live like that. Each visit to the market stripped away a piece of my dignity until I chose to simply stay home rather than face that judgment. I contributed to that, Folasade whispered. I made you feel that way even in your own home. Yes, Adewale said simply. You did. And now you will understand what that feels like. Not as punishment, but as teaching. How else will you truly comprehend what you did? Ifagbemi nodded. The trial is set. Tomorrow, when the market is full, Folasade must walk through it. She must face the stares, the whispers, the judgment. She must not hide, not cover herself, not try to avoid being seen. She must walk the length of the market, from the gate to the baobab tree and back, with her head held high. I cannot, Folasade said, her voice breaking. Please, ask anything else of me. Make me work, make me serve, make me sacrifice, but do not make me face that. That is precisely why you must face it, Mama Agba said, not unkindly. We are always asked to do the thing we most fear, because that is where our greatest growth lies. Amara spoke up quietly. I will walk with you, Ma. You will not face it alone. And I will be there as well, Adewale said. Not to save you from the experience, but to show you that dignity is possible even when others refuse to see it. Folasade looked at her husband, this man she had diminished, mocked, and hurt, now offering to accompany her through her own trial of humiliation. The generosity of it broke something in her chest. Why? She asked. Why would you help me? I have been so terrible to you. Adewale smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful smile Folasade had ever seen. Because, my wife, I made a choice when my legs stopped working. I decided that I would not let my suffering make me small or bitter. I would not let what happened to my body poison what was in my spirit. And if I am to be true to that choice, I cannot abandon it now, even when, especially when, the person who needs compassion is the one who showed me none. He paused, then added, besides, there is a proverb. The fire that refines gold must be hot enough to melt it but not so hot it destroys it. Perhaps I am meant to help keep your fire at the right temperature, hot enough for transformation, but not so hot that it consumes you entirely. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that seemed to mock Folasade's inner darkness. Amara helped her dress in a simple white wrapper, the color of humility and new beginnings. White? Folasade asked. White, Amara confirmed. So that everyone can see you clearly. No hiding in dark colors. No blending into shadows. This trial requires you to be visible. Adewale had arranged for a strong young man named Tunde to help carry him in a specially made chair, a kind of seat attached to poles that two men could lift and carry. It had been crafted for occasions when Adewale absolutely needed to go somewhere, though he rarely used it, preferring to avoid the spectacle. Today, he insisted on coming. The small procession set out, Tunde and another man carrying Adewale's chair, Folasade walking beside them, and Amara on her other side. Ifagbemi and the elders had gone ahead to prepare the market, to ensure that this would be a teaching moment and not a riot. As they approached the market gates, Folasade could hear the buzz of activity, the normal sounds of buying and selling, haggling and laughing. But as they entered, the sounds changed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter died. The vibrant noise of the market was replaced by the sound of whispers spreading like wind through grass. That's her. Look what she's become. The ancestors' mark. She was so beautiful before. Folasade felt every eye on her. Felt them taking in her darkened, roughened skin, her changed features, the physical manifestation of her inner ugliness made visible. Her instinct was to run, to cover her face, to disappear. But Amara's hand was firm on her elbow. Walk, Ma. Head high. Remember, you are not your skin. You are the spirit beneath it, and that spirit is learning, growing, being refined. Folasade took a step. Then another. The market seemed to stretch before her like an impossible distance. Every face she passed seemed to hold judgment. Some looked away quickly when she met their eyes. Others stared openly, their expressions ranging from horror to pity to curiosity. A small child pointed and asked loudly, "Mama, what's wrong with that woman?" The mother shushed the child quickly, but the words hung in the air. What's wrong with that woman? How many times had Folasade asked similar questions, or thought them, about others who didn't meet her standards of normal, of beautiful, of acceptable? Halfway through the market, a voice called out, "Bisela," standing at a fabric stall. "Folasade. I didn't expect to see you here." Folasade stopped, facing her former friend. Bisela's face showed clear discomfort, the awkwardness of not knowing how to interact with someone whose status had so dramatically fallen. "Good morning, Bisela," Folasade said, forcing the words out. "I am here because I am learning something important. I am learning what it feels like to be judged by appearance alone." "But you brought this on yourself," Bisela said, not unkindly but matter-of-factly. "Everyone knows what you did." "Yes," Folasade agreed. "I did bring this on myself. Every cruel word I spoke to my husband, every mocking gesture, every time I made him feel less than human because his legs don't work, all of that earned me this lesson. And now I am walking through the judgment I placed on him, and it is harder than I ever imagined." The honesty of the statement seemed to shock Bisela. Around them, the market had grown quiet. People were listening, drawn to the unusual sight of someone accepting their faults so publicly. "What will you do?" Bisela asked. "I will finish this walk," Folasade said. "And then I will go home and continue learning. And perhaps, if the ancestors are merciful, I will become someone worthy of being called a wife to a man as good as Adewale." She moved on, and the walk continued. Past the yam sellers who had once given her the best selection. Past the palm oil trader whose child had seen the darkness around her. Past Mama Ido who had first noticed the change in her hands. Each person she passed was a mirror, reflecting back to her what she had been. Someone who judged others by their exterior, who valued appearance over character, who had forgotten that beneath every skin, beautiful or not, whole or not, lives a soul of equal worth. By the time she reached the baobab tree at the market center, the traditional gathering place, the heart of the community, Folasade was weeping. But she kept her head up, let the tears fall where all could see them. There was no point in hiding anymore. The ancestors had stripped away her ability to hide. At the baobab, Mama Agba waited. The old woman gestured for Folasade to approach. "Daughter," Mama Agba said, her voice carrying across the now silent market, "you have completed the first half of the walk. Before you turn back, I ask you to do something." "What must I do?" Folasade asked. "Tell these people, tell all of us, what you have learned so far." Folasade looked around at the gathered crowd. So many faces. So much judgment. But also something else. In some eyes, she saw understanding. In others, recognition. People were seeing themselves in her story. She took a deep breath and spoke, her rough voice carrying clearly in the quiet. "I have learned," she began, "that the ancestors are better teachers than I ever was to myself. For seasons, I looked at my husband and saw only what he couldn't do. I saw broken legs and forgot to see the whole person. I saw limitation and forgot to see the spirit that transcended that limitation." She paused, wiping tears from her changed face. "I thought beauty was everything. I thought appearance determined worth. I was wrong. The cruelest thing I did was not just my words, but my failure to see my husband's true value. And now the ancestors have given me skin that matches what my heart had become, ugly, hardened, closed off from compassion." A murmur ran through the crowd. "But here is what I am learning in this market today," Folasade continued. "I am learning that walking through judgment is one of the hardest things a person can do. Every eye that stares, every whisper I hear, every face that turns away, I feel it like a physical blow. And my husband felt this. Perhaps not as dramatically, but he felt it every time I looked at him with disappointment, every time I sighed as if his very existence burdened me." She turned to where Adewale sat in his carried chair. I am sorry, husband. I am sorry for every wound I gave you, every piece of dignity I stripped away, every moment I made you feel less than the magnificent man you are. Adewale's face was wet with tears. I forgive you, wife. And I will walk this path of healing with you for as long as it takes. Mama Agba nodded, satisfied. Let all here witness. This is how transformation begins. Not with hiding our shame, but with acknowledging it. Not with defending our actions, but with taking responsibility for them. Not with demanding forgiveness, but with genuinely changing. The old woman raised her walking stick. Folasade's trial is not over. She must complete the walk back. But when you look at her, remember, you are not just seeing a woman marked by the ancestors. You are seeing yourselves. Every judgment you've made, every time you valued form over spirit, every moment you've forgotten that all people carry the divine spark, all of that is reflected in this woman's skin. Let her walk be a teaching to us all, Baba Ogunlade added, stepping forward. Let us examine our own hearts and ask, where have we been cruel? Where have we lacked compassion? Where have we forgotten our connection to one another? The walk back through the market was different. The whispers continued, but some of them had changed in tone. A few people even nodded respectfully as Folasade passed. An old woman reached out and briefly touched her arm, a gesture of solidarity that made Folasade's tears flow harder. By the time they reached the market gates, Folasade was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. She had walked through the fire of judgment and survived it. But she knew, somehow, that this was just the beginning. As they made their way back to the compound, Amara walked close beside her. You did well, Ma, the young woman said quietly. Did I? Folasade asked. I cried. I was weak. Tears are not weakness, Amara replied. My grandmother used to say, the soil that will not receive rain will not produce crops. Your tears are the rain that softens hardened ground. They are necessary for new growth. Back in the compound, as the sun climbed toward midday, Ifagbemi came to speak with them. His face was serious but not unkind. The first trial is complete, he said. But there are more to come. The transformation will not reverse until Folasade has learned what the ancestors require her to learn. And that learning requires more than one walk through the market. What else must I do? Folasade asked, weary but resolved. You must serve, Ifagbemi said simply. You must become what you scorned. You must help those you once ignored. You must see with new eyes what you refused to see before. I don't understand, Folasade said. Adewale, being helped from his carried chair back to his regular seat, explained. You must learn to serve those who cannot serve themselves. Just as I needed help and you gave it grudgingly if at all, you must now learn to help others with genuine compassion, not duty or obligation. There is a leper colony on the outskirts of the village, Mama Agba added, having followed them to the compound. People shunned by society because of their affliction. You will go there tomorrow and for the next 7 days. You will help them, tend them, serve them. And in doing so, you will learn to see beyond the surface to the humanity beneath. Folasade felt her stomach turn. Lepers. People even more marked than she was. People she had always avoided, always looked away from when they appeared at the edges of the market begging for alms. She started to protest, then stopped. Hadn't she just walked through the market accepting her trial? Hadn't she just spoken of learning and changing? If she balked now, what did that say about her words? I will go, she said quietly. I will serve them. Ifagbemi smiled. Good. This is the path to wisdom, not running from what frightens us, but walking toward it with open hearts. The ancestors test us not to break us, but to remake us into who we are meant to be. As the visitors departed and evening fell over the compound, Folasade sat in the courtyard with Adewale. The stars were beginning to appear, ancient lights bearing witness to human struggles below. They say the earth has ears and the sky has eyes, and both report to the ancestors. In the village of Abeokuta, there lived a woman whose tongue was sharper than the blacksmith's blade and a man whose legs would not carry him, but whose spirit walked with giants. What the cruel wife did on that sun-scorched afternoon, the very heavens would answer. Gather close, for this is a story of pride humbled and patience crowned. The storyteller's gourd rattle shakes 3 times. Kpa, 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 calling the children of Abeokuta to gather beneath the ancient Iroko tree. The old griot clears his throat, and even the evening birds quiet their songs. "Before I begin," the griot says, his eyes sweeping across the gathered faces, "tell me, what is more crippled, legs that cannot walk, or a heart that cannot love?" The question hangs in the humid air like smoke from the evening fires. "Way come back, family, to Tales by Dom. We are glad to have you back. Sit still and grab a drink as you enjoy this story. If you are new to this channel, kindly click on the subscribe button for new uploads. Now let's continue. In the time when our grandmothers' grandmothers were young, in the thriving village of Abeokuta where the Augun River sang its eternal song, there stood a compound more beautiful than any other. Its walls were painted with ochre and indigo, its courtyard swept clean as a chief's conscience should be. Plantain trees heavy with fruit lined the pathways, and the scent of blooming hibiscus competed with the aroma of pepper soup bubbling in clay pots. This was the home of Adewale, whose name meant the crown has come home, though crowns and walking had both become strangers to him. 3 rainy seasons past, Adewale had been the finest palm wine tapper in 5 villages. Young men envied his strength. Maidens composed songs about his broad shoulders and sure feet that could climb the tallest palm without rope or fear. He had danced at festivals with such vigor that the drums seemed to beat just for him. The earth itself had seemed to rejoice beneath his steps. Then came the day the ancient palm chose to teach the village about the suddenness of fate. No one could say exactly what happened. Some said the palm was angry at being tapped too often. Others whispered that Adewale had forgotten to pour libation to the tree spirits that morning. The truth, like many truths, lived somewhere in the mist between the physical and spiritual worlds. What everyone knew was this: Adewale fell from a height that should have killed him, and perhaps it would have been more merciful if it had. His legs, those magnificent instruments of dance and strength, became twisted things that would not obey his mind's commands. The village herbalist tried every root and leaf known to the healing arts. The Babalawo cast divination after divination, sacrificed roosters and goats, prepared charms wrapped in sacred leaves. But Adewale's legs remained as still as the stone pestle in his mother's kitchen. "The ancestors have their reasons," the Babalawo had finally said, his voice heavy with the weight of mysteries he could not unlock. "Some battles are of the spirit, not the flesh. This man's test is not in his legs but in what lies above them." Adewale had accepted his fate with a grace that made the elders nod with approval. He learned to carve wood with hands that grew even more skilled in stillness. His stools and doors became famous, decorated with proverbs and animals that seemed to breathe. People came from distant villages to buy Adewale's work, and his compound remained prosperous. But there was one who could not accept it. One who looked at those silent legs and saw only shame. Folasade was beautiful the way a thunderstorm is beautiful, magnificent to behold but dangerous to embrace. Her skin was the color of kola nut, smooth and rich. Her eyes were large and bright, framed by lashes that needed no antimony to appear darkened. When she wrapped her jewel, the elaborate head tie sat upon her head like a crown, and she walked as if the very earth should feel honored to be beneath her feet. She had been the daughter of a successful trader, raised on fine things and finer compliments. Suitors had lined up at her father's compound like ants following honey, each one more prosperous than the last. But Folasade had chosen Adewale, strong, laughing Adewale who could climb any height and dance any dance. "That one," she had told her friends, pointing with her chin in the way of women who know their beauty is a form of currency. "That one will give me children as strong as leopards and a life as sweet as palm wine." The wedding had been the celebration of the decade. 7 different types of meat in the stew. Drummers from 3 villages. Folasade had danced in rapper after rapper, each one more expensive than the last, her joy as bright as the coral beads around her neck. For a season and a half, their compound had rung with laughter. Then came the fall. Then came the silence of legs that would not dance. Then came the slow poison that dripped into Folasade's heart. At first, she had played the dutiful wife, though her smile grew tighter each day. She had brought him food, though she set it down with increasing force. She had helped him move from his sleeping mat to the carved chair he now used, though her hands grew rougher, her sighs louder. "What did I do to deserve this?" she would mutter, not quite quietly enough. "Other women have husbands who stand tall in the marketplace. I have a husband who sits and carves wood like a child making toys." The village women had tried to counsel her. "Folasade," they said, "illness and health are both visitors that come to every home. Yesterday's strength does not promise tomorrow's. Your husband is still the same man." But Folasade heard only the sound of her own disappointment echoing in her ears. As the moon cycled, her bitterness grew like yam vines, spreading and choking everything in its path. The words she spoke to Adewale became thorns. The way she looked at him became blades. And worst of all, she began to perform her cruelty with an audience. Amara had come to their household during the last Harmattan season, when the dry wind blew dust from the Sahara and made old people's bones ache. She was a young woman from a neighboring village, orphaned by fever, grateful for work and shelter. Her name meant grace, and she moved through the compound with the quiet efficiency of rain soaking into thirsty ground. She was neither beautiful nor ugly, neither tall nor short, one of those people the eye might pass over in the marketplace. But her grandmother had been an oracle before the fever took her, and Amara had inherited something of the sight. Not visions exactly, but a sensitivity to the weight of things, the quality of silence, the color of people's intentions. "Are you afraid?" Adewale asked gently. "Terrified," Folasade admitted. "Lepers. I have always feared them. Feared their disease, their appearance, their differentness." "Yes," Adewale said. "Just as you feared, or perhaps despised, my differentness when my legs stopped working. The ancestors are wise, Folasade. They are taking you to the very heart of your fear and your prejudice. There, in that leper colony, you will either find your true self or lose yourself completely." "Which do you think will happen?" she asked. Adewale reached out and took her roughened hand in his. The gesture, so simple, so kind, nearly broke her. "I think," he said, "that you will find strength you didn't know you had. I think you will discover that compassion grows in the strangest soil. And I think that the woman who returns from that leper colony will be someone I will be proud to call my wife." His words gave her courage for what lay ahead. But that night, as she lay on her mat, Folasade wondered, was she strong enough for what was coming? Could she truly transform, or would this trial break her completely? Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow, she would walk into the place she feared most and face the parts of herself she had hidden away behind beauty and pride. The ancestors were teaching her, one painful lesson at a time. And the hardest lessons were still to come. When have you had to face a truth about yourself that was uncomfortable or painful? What did it take for you to truly see your own behavior clearly? In your tradition, how do elders guide people through such moments of reckoning? The path to the leper colony wound through the forest like a reluctant stream, as if even the earth was hesitant to lead travelers to that place of exile. Folasade walked it with Amara at her side, each step feeling heavier than the last, though the physical distance was not great. The colony sat at the boundary between the village lands and the wild forest, close enough that the afflicted could still receive occasional charity from their former community, far enough that the healthy could pretend they didn't exist. A collection of small huts built from palm fronds and mud, surrounded by a clearing that both protected and isolated. As they approached, Folasade's courage, which had seemed so solid in the compound, began to crumble like poorly fired clay. "I cannot do this," she whispered, stopping on the path. "Amara, I cannot." The young woman turned to her, and in the morning light filtering through the trees, she looked older than her years, or perhaps ageless, as if her grandmother's wisdom lived in her bones. "Ma," Amara said, "do you know why lepers are sent away?" Because their disease is catching. Because they are unclean." Amara supplied. "Cursed? Less than human." Folasade flinched at the words, hearing in them an echo of what she had thought about her own husband. "But what if," Amara continued, "what if they are not cursed but chosen? What if the ancestors allow certain people to carry visible affliction so that the rest of us must confront our own capacity for compassion or cruelty?" "That seems terribly unfair to the afflicted," Folasade said. "Yes," Amara agreed simply. "It does. Just as it was terribly unfair that your husband fell from that palm tree. Just as it is unfair that children die of fever, that floods destroy crops, that any suffering exists at all. But the ancestors work in ways we cannot fully understand. They use what is to teach what should be." Before Folasade could respond, a figure emerged from the colony, a woman, bent with age or affliction or both, her face wrapped in cloth, her hands bandaged. She moved slowly, leaning on a stick, each step clearly painful. But when she spoke, her voice was strong. "Who comes to visit the forgotten ones?" "I am Folasade," Folasade said, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been sent by the Babalawo. To serve. To learn." The rapt face turned toward her, studying her with eyes that gleamed with intelligence from between the cloth folds. "Ah," the woman said. "You are the one. The proud wife who mocked her crippled husband. The beautiful woman brought low by the ancestors. We heard of you. News travels even to places like this." The words should have stung, but Folasade found she was beyond that kind of pain now. "Yes," she said. "I am that woman. And I have been sent to serve you and the others here." The woman laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Serve us? You, who looks at us with fear written all over your changed face. What service can you offer when you can barely stand to be near us?" Folasade started, then stopped. What could she say? The woman was right. Folasade was terrified, disgusted, desperate to turn and run. But Amara stepped forward. "Elder mother," she said, using the term of highest respect, "my companion comes in genuine desire to learn. She is afraid. Yes. But fear can be the beginning of courage if we walk toward it rather than away." The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she unwrapped the cloth from her face, revealing features ravaged by disease, nose partially collapsed, skin marked with the white patches and lesions that marked leprosy's progress. Folasade gasped and took an involuntary step backward. "There," the woman said. "That is the honest reaction. Fear. Revulsion. The desire to flee. At least you do not pretend otherwise." She rewrapped her face. "I am called Folasade. I was once a priestess of Ocean, beautiful and whole. That was before the disease came. Before I was sent away from everything I knew." "How long have you been here?" Folasade asked, finding her voice. 12 seasons, Folasade replied. "Long enough to die to who I was. Long enough to be reborn as something new. Come. If you are truly here to serve, there is much work to be done." Folasade led them into the colony, and Folasade entered a world she had never imagined. There were perhaps 20 people living there, men, women, even a few children who had been born to afflicted mothers. All bore the marks of leprosy in various stages, from early white patches to advanced deformity. But what shocked Folasade most was not the disease. It was the life. She had expected a place of despair, of people waiting to die. Instead, she found a functioning community. There were gardens where vegetables grew in neat rows, tended by hands that still could grip hoes despite missing fingers. There was a cooking area where women prepared food, their movements adapted to their limitations but no less effective. There were children playing a game with stones, laughing with the pure joy that children possess regardless of circumstance. "You expected misery," Folasade observed, watching Folasade's face. "You expected people broken by their affliction, waiting for death." Yes," Folasade admitted. "We were broken," Folasade said. "When we first arrived, each of us went through that breaking. We grieved for what we lost, our families, our former lives, our wholeness of body. Some people never recover from that breaking. They die, not from the disease, but from the loss of hope." She gestured around the colony. "But those of us who remain learned something precious. We learned that life continues even in affliction. That joy is still possible even when the body fails. That community and purpose can be found even in exile." "How?" Folasade asked. "How did you learn that?" Folasade smiled, and even through her ravaged face, the expression held genuine warmth. "We learned it from each other. And we learned it from one particular person who came to us 5 seasons ago. Come, I will show you." They walked through the colony to a hut slightly larger than the others. Inside, in the dim light filtering through the palm frond walls, Folasade saw a figure lying on a sleeping mat. As her eyes adjusted, she realized it was a young man, perhaps 20 seasons old, his body twisted by disease far beyond what she had seen in the others. He couldn't move his legs. His hands were curled and useless. His face bore the marks of leprosy's advanced stage. By all rights, he should have been the most pitiful figure in the colony. But when he saw them enter, his face lit up with a smile so radiant that Folasade felt her breath catch. "Folasade," he said, his voice clear despite his body's limitations. "You bring visitors. How wonderful." "This is Olumide," Folasade said. "He came to us unable to move, unable to care for himself, sent away by a family that could not bear to look at him anymore. We expected him to die within days." "But I didn't die," Olumide said cheerfully. I discovered that I had something to offer even from this mat. I have a voice, and I can tell stories. I can make people laugh. I can remember the old wisdom and teach it to the children. I may not be able to walk, but my spirit can dance. Folasade stared at him, her mind reeling. This young man, afflicted beyond anything she had seen, confined to a mat in a leper colony, spoke of dancing spirits and offering gifts. How? You seem confused, Olumide observed. Let me guess. You thought affliction meant the end of purpose. I don't understand, Folasade said honestly. How can you be so joyful? Look at what has happened to you. I have looked, Olumide replied. I've looked quite thoroughly, in fact, as there's little else to do from this mat. And yes, I see a body that doesn't work the way bodies should. But I also see something more important. What? Folasade asked, leaning forward despite herself. I see that I am more than my body, Olumide said simply. My body has failed in every measurable way. But my spirit? My spirit is learning to soar. My capacity for joy is greater now than when I was whole. My ability to find meaning is deeper. My connection to the ancestors is stronger. He paused, then asked, Tell me, visitor, why have you come here? And so Folasade told her story, all of it. How she had mocked her husband, how the ancestors had marked her, how she was being taught to see beyond appearance to true worth. As she spoke, tears fell from her changed eyes, and she made no attempt to hide them. When she finished, Olumide was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your husband with the legs that don't work, is he named Adewale? Folasade's heart skipped. Yes. How did you know? Because 3 moons ago, a man came to visit our colony. A man who arrived carried in a chair because his legs no longer served him. He came bringing food, medicine, words of encouragement. He sat with each of us, asked about our lives, treated us as if we were still fully human. Olumide's eyes held Folasade's gaze. That man was your husband. He told me his story, how he had fallen, how his legs had failed, how he had learned to find purpose beyond his limitation. He said he came to us because he knew what it was to be seen as less than whole, and he wanted to honor that understanding by serving others who faced similar judgment. The revelation struck Folasade like a physical blow. While she had been at home resenting Adewale's condition, mocking his limitations, he had been here, serving people far more afflicted than himself, offering the compassion she had denied him. I didn't know, she whispered. He never told me. Why would he? Folasade asked gently. You had made it clear that you saw his affliction as shameful. How could he tell you that he had come to a leper colony? That he had found kinship with the most rejected members of society? Folasade's legs gave out, and she sank to the ground. The full weight of her failure, of her blindness, of her cruelty crashed over her like a wave. She had not just mocked her husband. She had mocked a man who, despite his own suffering, had somehow found the strength to serve others. She had scorned someone who possessed more true nobility in his stillness than she had ever possessed in all her prideful movement. I am vile, she said, the words torn from somewhere deep within. I am worse than vile. I took a good man and tried to make him feel worthless because his body was damaged. But his spirit was always whole. It was mine that was broken. Yes, Folasade said simply. But broken things can be mended. That is why you are here. What followed were the hardest and most transformative 7 days of Folasade's life. Each morning, she and Amara would arrive at the colony as the sun rose. And each day, Folasade was asked to perform tasks that challenged everything she had been. The first day, she helped wash the bandages and wounds of the afflicted. Her hands, her beautiful hands that she had pampered and protected, touched diseased flesh, cleaned seeping sores, wrapped fresh cloth around damaged limbs. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, to protect herself. But she persisted, and slowly, the revulsion transformed into something else. She began to see the people beneath the afflictions, to hear their stories, to understand their humanity. There was Baba Tunde, an elder who had been a renowned drummer before the disease took his fingers. He taught Folasade the rhythms of life with his voice instead, showing her that music lives in the spirit even when the hands can no longer play. There was young Aisha, a girl of perhaps 10 seasons, born in the colony to an afflicted mother who had died in childbirth. Aisha had never known life outside this place, yet she possessed a joy so pure it seemed to illuminate the air around her. She taught Folasade that happiness is not dependent on circumstance but on perspective. The second day, Folasade helped prepare food for the colony. She ground pepper alongside women whose hands were twisted and scarred, learning their techniques, adapted to their limitations yet no less effective. They sang as they worked, songs of resilience, of hope, of the stubborn refusal to let affliction steal all joy. We sing, one woman named Kimi explained, because our voices are still whole. The disease cannot take our songs unless we let it. The third day, Folasade sat with Olumide and learned his story in depth. He had been a promising young scholar, studying to become a scribe, when the first white patches appeared on his skin. His family had tried to hide it, to seek treatments, but the disease progressed relentlessly. Eventually, they had no choice but to send him away. I was angry at first, Olumide admitted. So angry I thought it would consume me. I cursed the ancestors, my family, my fate. But Mama Sade taught me something important. What? Folasade asked. She taught me that anger is a fire. It can either destroy everything it touches, or it can be channeled into the forge where new things are made. I chose to let my anger forge a new understanding of what it means to be human, to be valuable, to have purpose. And you truly found purpose? Here? Like this. Folasade gestured to his immobile body. Olumide smiled. I found more purpose here than I ever had when I was whole. Before the disease, I was focused on small things, my appearance, my status, my personal advancement. Now I understand that the only things that truly matter are connection, compassion, the wisdom we share, the love we give. My body is ruined, but my understanding of what it means to truly live has never been clearer. The fourth day, Folasade helped tend the colony's gardens. She worked alongside men and women who used tools adapted to their damaged hands, who had created systems that allowed even the most severely afflicted to contribute to the community's sustenance. The ingenuity astounded her, how limitation had forced creativity, how need had birthed innovation. Your husband suggested this garden system, Mama Sade told her as they worked. When he came to visit, he saw how we struggled. He designed tools we could use, taught us techniques he had learned for his own carving work, ways to accomplish tasks when the hands don't work as they should. Each revelation about Adewale was another arrow to Folasade's heart. The man she had scorned had been here, serving, teaching, giving of himself to those even more afflicted than he was. While she had been consumed with her own disappointment, he had been living out the deepest principles of compassion and community. The fifth day, the children of the colony asked Folasade to tell them a story. She, who had never particularly liked children, who had been relieved when month after month passed without pregnancy, sat in a circle with these young ones marked by disease through no fault of their own. I don't know any stories, she protested to Mama Sade. Then tell them your own story, the elder woman advised. Tell them the truth. Children have a gift for seeing what is real. And so Folasade told them her story, not a sanitized version, but the true tale of a proud woman who mocked her husband and was marked by the ancestors. The children listened with wide eyes, asking questions that cut to the heart of things in the way only children can. Did you love your husband? One small boy asked. I thought I did, Folasade answered honestly. But I loved the idea of him, strong, perfect, able to make me look good. I didn't love the real him, the person inside the body. That's sad, the boy said. The inside is the best part. Yes, Folasade agreed, tears flowing freely now. Yes, it is. And I forgot that. But I'm trying to remember. Will the ancestors forgive you? Asked Aisha, the bright-spirited girl. I don't know, Folasade said. But I hope they will teach me how to forgive myself. The sixth day, Folasade witnessed a death. An old man named Baba Femi, who had been in the colony since its founding, passed away in the morning. Folasade had expected the community to grieve with despair, perhaps even with bitterness at a life ended in exile. Instead, they celebrated. Baba Femi is going home, Mama Sade explained as they prepared his body for burial. He is returning to the ancestors, free from the body that caused him so much pain. This is not a day for sorrow but for honoring a life well lived despite its hardships. They wrapped his body in white cloth, the finest they had, and sang songs that spoke of journey's end and new beginnings. They buried him in the small graveyard at the colony's edge, each person placing a flower on his grave and speaking a memory. When Folasade's turn came, she had nothing to say. She had barely known the man. But then Olumide, speaking from where he lay on his mat nearby, said, Baba Femi told me once that every person who comes to this colony is a teacher. He said you don't have to know someone long to learn from them. What did Baba Femi teach you, visitor? Folasade thought about the brief conversations she had had with the old man over the past days. He had smiled at her each morning, had thanked her for the smallest services, had treated her with dignity despite knowing her story. He taught me, Folasade said slowly, that gratitude doesn't depend on having much. He had almost nothing, yet he thanked me for everything. He showed me that grace is possible in any circumstance. Then he was a good teacher, Mama Sade said. And you were a good student. This is how we honor the dead, by learning from their lives. The seventh day, Folasade arrived at the colony to find everyone gathered in the central clearing. Mama Sade stood waiting, and beside her was Ifagbemi the Babalawo and the village elders. Your week of service is complete, Ifagbemi announced. But before you leave, the colony wishes to give you something. Folasade was confused. These people had nothing. What could they possibly give her? Mama Sade stepped forward, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it to reveal a beautifully carved calabash, its surface decorated with intricate patterns. Your husband came here 3 moons ago, Mama Sade said. He saw that we had nothing beautiful, nothing to remind us that beauty can exist even in this place of affliction. So he began to carve this for us. He worked on it in his compound, and each time he visited, he brought it to show us the progress. She held up the calabash, and Folasade saw that the carvings told a story, the story of broken people finding wholeness, of community rising from exile, of spirits that soared even when bodies were chained. He finished it just before you came to us, Mama Sade continued. He brought it on his last visit and said, this is for you, to hold your water, but also to hold the truth, that beauty is not in perfection but in the spirit that persists despite imperfection. Folasade took the calabash in her trembling hands. She could see Adewale's distinctive carving style, could imagine him working on this late into the night, creating beauty for people the world had forgotten. But why give it to me? She asked. It's yours. Because, Mama Sade said, we want you to take it back to your husband and tell him what you learned here. Tell him that his visits mattered. Tell him that his compassion changed lives. Tell him that his gift was not just this calabash, but the reminder that we are still human, still worthy, still capable of receiving and giving love. Olumide spoke up from his mat. And tell him that we are grateful. Tell him that he, who could have stayed home nursing his own wounds, chose instead to bind up ours. That is the mark of true nobility. Ifagbemi stepped forward. Folasade, daughter of traders, wife of Adewale, you came here as part of your trial. You came to learn to see beyond appearance, to find compassion for those society scorns. Tell us, what have you learned? Folasade looked around at the faces of the colony, faces marked by disease but also marked by resilience, by joy, by an understanding of what truly matters that she, in all her former beauty and pride, had never possessed. I have learned, she said, her voice breaking, that I have been blind. Not just to my husband's worth, but to what worth actually means. I thought value came from beauty, from wholeness of body, from the ability to move through the world without limitation. But these 7 days have shown me the truth. She gestured to the people around her. You have less than anyone in the village. You have been cast out, marked as unclean, forced to live in exile. Your bodies are failing you in ways that must be agonizing. And yet you have more true wisdom, more genuine joy, more real community than I ever had in my compound with all its fine things and beautiful appearances. Tears streamed down her face. I thought my husband was less than a man because he couldn't walk. But he is more of a man than most who can run. He took his own suffering and transformed it into compassion for others. He didn't let his limitation make him small or bitter. He let it make him large, expansive, capable of seeing and serving those even more afflicted than himself. She turned to Ifagbemi. I have learned that the ancestors marked me not to punish me, but to help me see. I was ugly inside, even when I was beautiful outside. And now that my outside matches what I was inside, I can finally understand what needs to change. And what is that? The Babalawo asked. Everything, Folasade said simply. Everything about how I see the world, how I measure worth, how I define beauty, how I understand what it means to be human. All of it needs to change. Mama Sade nodded slowly. 7 days ago, You came here with fear and revulsion. Today, you leave with understanding. But understanding is not the end. It is the beginning. What will you do with what you have learned? I will honor it, Folasade said. I will honor my husband as he deserves to be honored. I will serve where I once scorned. I will give compassion where I once gave cruelty. And I will remember you, all of you, as my teachers in the things that truly matter. As Folasade and Amara walked back through the forest toward the village, carrying the carved calabash, Folasade felt something shifting. At first, she thought it was just emotion, the deep feeling stirred by the week's experiences. But then she looked down at her hands. The darkness was fading. Not completely, not dramatically, but unmistakably. The rough, scaly texture was smoothing. The deep shadows were lightening. Her skin was still marked, still changed, but the transformation that had been progressing forward was now beginning to reverse. Amara, she whispered, holding up her hands. Look. The young woman smiled, and in that smile was her grandmother's ancient wisdom. The ancestors are pleased with your learning. But the transformation is not complete. You still have one more trial. What trial? Folasade asked. You must face your husband, Amara said. You must stand before him, tell him what you have learned, and ask him not just for forgiveness, but for the chance to become the wife he deserves. That is the hardest trial of all, because he would be justified in refusing you. The word struck fear into Folasade's heart, but it was a different kind of fear than she had felt before. This was not the fear of judgment or of physical transformation. This was the fear of having finally understood something precious only to discover it might be too late. As they emerged from the forest and saw the village ahead, Folasade clutched the carved calabash to her chest. In it, she carried not just water but the weight of truth, that her husband, the man she had scorned and diminished, was more worthy of honor than anyone she had ever known. And she was about to discover whether love, once broken by cruelty, could ever truly be mended. The sun was setting as they entered the village, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. And there, at the compound gate, sat Adewale in his chair, waiting. He had been waiting, Folasade realized, for 7 days. Waiting to see if she would complete her trial. Waiting to see if she would return changed or unchanged. Waiting with the patient dignity that had characterized everything about him. As she approached, their eyes met. And in that moment, everything hung in the balance. The past with all its pain, the present with all its uncertainty, and the future that might be possible if grace proved stronger than judgment. Folasade knelt in the dust before her husband, the carved calabash in her hands, and prepared to speak the most important words of her life. In your own life or community, when have you witnessed someone showing compassion to those who had hurt them? What does your tradition teach about the balance between justice and mercy, between holding people accountable and offering them the chance to change? Folasade kneels before Adewale with her confession, her learning, and her transformed heart. But will it be enough? Will a man who suffered so much cruelty find the strength to forgive? And what final test do the ancestors have in store before this story can find its resolution? The most emotional moment of this tale is about to unfold. The dust beneath Folasade's knees was still warm from the day's sun, but she felt it as if for the first time, the earth that had always been there, solid and forgiving, accepting the weight of whoever knelt upon it without judgment. Around them, the sounds of evening settled over the village, cooking fires crackling to life, children being called home, the day's final conversations drifting on the breeze. But in the compound of Adewale and Folasade, there was only silence and waiting. Adewale looked at his wife kneeling before him, and his face was unreadable. Not angry, not pleased, just waiting. Waiting to hear what she would say. Waiting to understand if the woman who had left 7 days ago had truly changed, or if this was merely performance driven by fear. Folasade raised her eyes to meet his, and for the first time in seasons, she truly saw him. Not his useless legs, not the limitation of his body, but the man himself, the soul that lived behind his patient eyes, the spirit that had somehow remained unbroken despite all her efforts to break it. Husband, she began, her voice rough with emotion, I have no right to ask you to listen to me. I have no right to expect your forgiveness. But I am asking anyway, not because I deserve it, but because I need you to know what I have learned. Adewale inclined his head slightly, giving her permission to continue. Folasade placed the carved calabash on the ground between them. The people of the leper colony gave me this. They told me you carved it for them, that you visited them, served them, treated them as human when the rest of the world had cast them aside. She took a shaking breath. While I was here, mocking you for your stillness, scorning you for your limitation, you were there, giving compassion to those even more afflicted than yourself. While I was consumed with my own disappointment, you were living out a wisdom I couldn't begin to comprehend. Tears fell freely now, and she made no attempt to stop them. I thought I understood what happened when the ancestors marked me. I thought I was being punished for one moment of cruelty, for words spoken in anger. But I was wrong. The ancestors were not punishing one moment, they were revealing what I had become over many seasons. They were showing me the ugliness I had cultivated in my spirit while I congratulated myself on the beauty of my face. Adewale's expression softened slightly, but he remained silent, letting her speak. I have spent 7 days at the leper colony, Folasade continued. I have touched diseased flesh and cleaned festering wounds. I have sat with children born into exile through no fault of their own. I have listened to the stories of people who lost everything, family, health, dignity, yet somehow found joy and purpose and community. She picked up the calabash, running her fingers over its intricate carvings. And do you know what I learned, husband? I learned that I have been the poorest person in this village, despite our prosperity. I have been the most afflicted, despite my perfect skin. I have been the most exiled, despite living in the heart of the community. How so? Adewale asked quietly, his first words. Because I was blind to what truly matters, Folasade said. Those people in the colony, with their ruined bodies and their exile from society, possess more wealth than I ever had. They have gratitude. They have compassion. They have understanding of what it means to be human. And you, my husband, you have been trying to teach me these things all along, but I refuse to see. She set down the calabash and placed both hands on the ground before Adewale, the traditional gesture of utmost humility and submission. I cannot undo the pain I caused you. I cannot take back the cruel words, the mocking gestures, the daily humiliations I inflicted. But I can tell you this, I see you now. I see the man you are, a man of such strength that limitation could not break him, such wisdom that suffering refined rather than destroyed him, such compassion that he could serve others while being scorned in his own home. Her voice broke. And I am asking, not demanding, not expecting, but humbly asking, if you can find it in your spirit to forgive me. Not to forget, because what I did should not be forgotten. But to forgive, so that I might have the chance to become the wife you deserved all along. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Somewhere in the compound, Amara moved quietly, tending to evening tasks but staying within earshot. The young woman's presence was a reminder that this moment, like all the moments of this trial, was witnessed, by humans and by spirits. Finally, Adewale spoke, and his voice was thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. Folasade, when I fell from that palm tree and my legs ceased to work, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything that made me a man, my strength, my ability to provide, my place in the world. I was angry, bitter, filled with such darkness that I could barely see light. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But slowly, with the help of the Babalawo and the elders, I began to understand something. I began to see that the fall was not just a tragedy but a teaching. The ancestors were asking me, who are you when your legs don't work? What is your worth when strength fails? Can you find meaning beyond what your body can do? And you found it, Folasade whispered. I found it, Adewale agreed. I found it in my carving, yes, but more than that, I found it in service. When I heard about the leper colony, I felt drawn to visit. These people who had lost so much more than I had, who faced exile and disease and the complete rejection of society, I needed to meet them, to learn from them, to serve them. His eyes grew distant with memory. And they taught me, Folasade. They taught me that the human spirit is stronger than any affliction. That joy is a choice we make, not a condition we wait for. That purpose can be found in the smallest acts of kindness, the briefest moments of connection. He looked directly at his wife. But all the while I was learning these lessons, I was coming home to you, my wife, the person who should have been my closest companion, and facing fresh cruelty each day. Your words were knives. Your sighs were stones. Your disgust was a daily death. Folasade flinched but did not look away. She owed him this, to hear his pain, to witness what she had done. There were nights, Adewale continued, his voice soft but steady, when I wondered if it would be better to take my own life. To end the humiliation, the The constant reminder that I had become worthless in my own wife's eyes. But I didn't, because I kept remembering something Mama Sade told me. What did she tell you? Folasade asked. She said, the person who hurts you most is often teaching you the most important lesson, though neither of you may know it at the time. I didn't understand what she meant then. But I think I understand now. He leaned forward in his chair. You were teaching me, Folasade, though you didn't intend to. You were teaching me that I could maintain my dignity even when someone tried to strip it away. That I could choose compassion even when I received cruelty. That I could forgive even when forgiveness wasn't asked for. And can you? Folasade asked, barely breathing. Can you forgive me now that I am asking? Adewale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, tell me truly, have you changed? Or are you simply afraid of remaining transformed? It was the question Folasade had been asking herself. And she knew that if she lied now, if she gave him the answer she thought he wanted to hear rather than the truth, everything would be lost. I don't know, she admitted. I want to say I have completely changed, that the woman who mocked you is gone forever. But I am honest enough now to know that change is not complete in 7 days, or even 7 seasons. I have learned so much, seen so much, understood so much, but learning is not the same as becoming. She raised her head to look at him fully. What I can tell you is this, I will never forget what I learned in that colony. I will never forget the faces of those children born into exile. I will never forget Mama Sade's wisdom or Olumide's joy despite his ruined body. I will never forget Baba Femi's gratitude for the smallest kindnesses. These things are carved into my spirit now, as surely as you carved that calabash. She paused, then added, and I will never forget that while I was scorning you, you were serving others. That truth shames me more than any ancestral mark ever could. But it also shows me who I want to become, someone capable of that kind of compassion, that kind of strength, that kind of love. And if your skin returns to its former beauty? Adewale asked. If the ancestors restore what they took away, will you forget these lessons? I pray not, Folasade said. But I am asking you to help me remember. To hold me accountable. To remind me, when I start to slip back into old patterns, of what I learned. I cannot walk this path alone, husband. I need you, not to save me, but to walk beside me. Adewale closed his eyes for a moment, and Folasade saw his lips moving in silent prayer. When he opened them again, they were wet with tears. I forgive you, he said simply. Not because you have earned it, but because holding on to anger and hurt would only continue to poison both our lives. I forgive you because the ancestors taught me that forgiveness is not about deserving, it's about choosing to let love be stronger than pain. Folasade's sob broke the evening quiet. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. But, Adewale continued, his voice firm, forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. We cannot go back to what we were, Folasade. That marriage is dead, killed by cruelty and resurrected by suffering. We must build something new, a marriage based not on appearance or ability, but on genuine respect, honest communication, and mutual compassion. Yes, Folasade agreed. Yes, that is what I want. A new beginning. Then stand up, Adewale said. Stop kneeling before me. We are husband and wife, partners, equals in our humanity if not in our abilities. Stand up, and let us begin again. Folasade rose shakily to her feet. And as she did, she felt something shift, not just emotionally, but physically. The transformation that had been slowly reversing accelerated. The darkness that had marked her skin continued to fade. The roughness smoothed. The change that the ancestors had wrought began to undo itself. But not completely. As Folasade looked at her hands in the fading light, she saw that while much of the darkness had lifted, a small mark remained on her right palm, a dark patch the size of a cowrie shell, shaped almost like a flower. It's still there, she said, showing Adewale. At that moment, Ifagbemi stepped through the compound gate, as if he had been waiting for precisely this moment. Behind him came Mama Agba, Baba Ogunlade, and the other elders. And with them, to Folasade's shock, came Mama Sade from the leper colony, leaning heavily on her walking stick, her face wrapped in its customary cloth. The ancestors have spoken, Ifagbemi announced. They have seen the transformation of Folasade's spirit and have lifted most of their mark. But they leave a reminder, a small sign that will stay with her always. Why? Folasade asked. Why not remove it completely? Folasade stepped forward. Because, daughter, the best lessons are the ones we carry with us. That mark on your palm will remind you, every day for the rest of your life, of what you learned. It will remind you to look beyond appearance to spirit. It will remind you that suffering can teach what comfort never can. It will remind you that every person, no matter their body's condition, carries the divine spark. And, Mama Agba added, it will mark you as someone who has been to the depths and returned. Others who struggle, who face their own trials, will see that mark and know, here is someone who understands. Here is someone who has learned. Here is someone who can help. Folasade looked at the mark with new eyes. What had seemed like a curse now looked like a gift, a permanent reminder of the most important lessons of her life. I will wear it with honor, she said. Baba Ogunlade stepped forward, raising his staff. Then let it be proclaimed throughout the village, Folasade, wife of Adewale, has completed her trials. She has walked through the fire of judgment and emerged transformed. She has learned what the ancestors required her to learn. And she carries their mark as a sign of their teaching and her transformation. The elder turned to address both Folasade and Adewale. Your marriage was broken. But the ancestors have shown you how to rebuild it on firmer foundations. You have both suffered. He threw the fall that crippled his legs, she threw the pride that crippled her spirit. But suffering is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of wisdom. He placed his staff on the ground with a decisive thump. I declare this trial complete. What the ancestors divided, they have now reunited. What they broke down, they have rebuilt. What they taught in darkness, let it now be lived in light. 3 days later, the village gathered for a feast of restoration. It was a tradition as old as the village itself. When someone had been through a great trial and emerged transformed, the community celebrated not just the individual success but the collective learning that came from witnessing it. The compound of Adewale and Folasade was transformed. Cooking fires blazed, filling the air with the scent of jollof rice, fried plantains, goat stew rich with spices, and fresh fish grilled over open flames. Palm wine flowed freely, and drummers set up in the courtyard, their instruments speaking in the language that predated words. But the most remarkable sight was Folasade herself. Her beauty had largely returned, her skin once again smooth, her features once again lovely. But something fundamental had changed. She moved differently now, without the prideful sway of before. She spoke differently, without the sharp edge of superiority. And she looked at people differently, truly seeing them, meeting their eyes with genuine interest rather than calculating judgment. She wore a simple wrapper of indigo cloth, and on her head, a jewel tied with modest elegance. And she made no attempt to hide the mark on her palm. Instead, she let it show, and when people asked about it, she told them her story, not with shame, but with the honesty of someone who had learned that truth, even uncomfortable truth, is the foundation of wisdom. The people of the leper colony had been invited, a controversial decision that had caused much discussion among the village elders. Many feared contamination, feared that bringing the afflicted into the heart of the village would spread disease. But Ifagbemi had been firm. The disease is not as contagious as fear, he had said. And if we are to truly learn from Folasade's trial, we must face our own fears and prejudices. The lepers will come, they will be honored as teachers, and we will learn to see them as human beings rather than as afflictions with legs. And so they came, Folasade, Olumide carried on a litter by strong young men, Babatunde the former drummer, young Aisha with her irrepressible joy, and others. They came wrapped in their best cloths, their faces showing both trepidation and hope. The village's reaction was mixed. Some people kept their distance, still uncomfortable. But others, inspired by Folasade's example and Adewale's long service to the colony, approached them with genuine warmth. Folasade herself made sure to serve them first, bringing them the best portions of food, seating them in places of honor, introducing them to the village not as lepers but as her teachers. This is Folasade, she would say, who taught me that wisdom can bloom even in exile. This is Olumide, who showed me that joy is not dependent on a body that works but on a spirit that soars. This is Aisha, who reminded me that happiness is a choice we make each day. As the feast progressed and palm wine loosened tongues, people began to share their own stories of judgment and prejudice, of times they had looked at someone with affliction and seen only the affliction, not the person. The gathering became less a celebration and more a collective confession, a community-wide reckoning with the ways they had all failed to see divine worth in every human being. As the sun began to set, Painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the drummers increased their tempo. It was time for dancing, the part of any festival where the village's joy expressed itself in movement and rhythm. Folasade watched as people rose to dance, their bodies moving to the ancient rhythms. She felt the pull of the drums in her own body, the desire to move, to express the transformation she had undergone through physical celebration. But she hesitated. How could she dance while her husband sat still? How could she celebrate mobility when the man she loved could not join her? As if reading her thoughts, Adewale smiled and said, "Dance, wife. Your legs work. Use them with joy, not with guilt." "But you?" "I will dance in my own way," Adewale said. And to Folasade's amazement, he began to sway in his chair, his upper body moving to the rhythm, his arms weaving patterns in the air that captured the music's essence. His hands, so skilled at carving, now carved shapes in the air, a different kind of dance, but dance nonetheless. Then Amara appeared, with an idea that would become village legend. She approached Olumide's litter and said, "You told Folasade your spirit could dance even if your body could not. Show us." And Olumide, paralyzed from the neck down, began to sing. His voice rose above the drums, powerful and clear, weaving melodies that seemed to make the air itself dance. Others from the leper colony joined in, creating harmonies that transformed sound into movement, proving that dance is not just what the body does but what the spirit expresses. Inspired, the village's dancers began to modify their movements, creating a new style that incorporated those who couldn't stand. They danced around the seated, made circles that included everyone, created patterns that honored all forms of participation. Folasade joined the dance, but she kept returning to Adewale, weaving her movements around his chair, making him part of her expression. At one point, she knelt before him again, but this time not in submission or apology, in partnership. She took his hands, and together they created a dance of stillness and movement, of limitation and transcendence, of two people finding a new way to move through the world together. The village watched, and in watching, understood. This was not pity. This was not accommodation. This was a new definition of what it meant to celebrate together, to move together, to be a community that honored all its members regardless of their body's abilities. The blessing of the ancestors. As night fell fully and torches were lit around the compound, Ifagbemi called for quiet. The Babalawo stood in the center of the gathering, his divining tray in his hands, his face solemn with the weight of the message he carried. "The ancestors have watched these proceedings," he announced. "They have seen Folasade's transformation. They have witnessed Adewale's forgiveness. They have observed the village's learning. And they wish to speak." He cast his divining chains, reading the patterns they made on his tray. His eyes widened, and a smile broke across his usually stern face. "The ancestors say this," Ifagbemi proclaimed. "They say that what began as one woman's trial has become a village's teaching. They say that Folasade's mark will serve as a reminder not just to her, but to all who see it. Look beyond the surface to the spirit beneath. Judge not by appearance but by character. Value not what the body can do but who the person truly is." He paused, then continued, "And they say this, Adewale's suffering was not punishment but preparation. He was being prepared to teach what only those who have suffered can teach, that limitation does not define us, that dignity transcends ability, that the human spirit can soar even when the body cannot move." The Babalawo turned to face Folasade and Adewale directly. "The ancestors bless your marriage, rebuilt on firmer foundations. They bless your household, which will become a place of teaching and healing. And they bless your future, which will bear fruit you cannot yet imagine." At these words, Folasade felt something shift deep within her body, a sensation she had never felt before, but somehow recognized. She gasped and placed her hand on her belly. Mama Agba, with the knowledge of one who had birthed and midwifed many children, smiled knowingly. "The ancestors' blessing takes many forms," she said. "Sometimes it is the healing of what was broken. Sometimes it is the gift of new life." Folasade looked at Adewale, her eyes wide with wonder and question. He reached for her hand, the one marked with a dark flower, and held it gently. "A child?" he asked. "Perhaps," Mama Agba said. "Time will tell. But whether in 2 moons or 10, I sense that this household will know the joy of children. And those children will be raised by parents who understand what truly matters, who can teach them to see beyond appearance to essence, who can show them that every person, regardless of their form or ability, carries divine worth." The feast continued late into the night, But eventually, the guests departed. The people of the leper colony were carried or walked back to their homes, carrying with them baskets of food and, more importantly, the knowledge that they had been seen, honored, and celebrated by the village that had once exiled them. As the last guest left and the fires burned down to embers, Folasade and Adewale sat together in their courtyard. Amara had retired to her room, giving them privacy. "Husband," Folasade said softly, "I have a question." "Ask," Adewale replied. "When did you stop hating me? During all those moons when I was cruel to you, when I mocked your condition and made your suffering worse, when did you let go of the anger?" Adewale was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not sure I can point to a single moment," he finally said. "It was gradual, like dawn breaking. At first, the anger was all I felt. But then, slowly, I began to understand something." "What?" "I began to understand that your cruelty came from your own suffering. You were suffering from disappointment, from fear, from the gap between what you expected life to be and what it actually was. Your suffering made you cruel, and recognizing that helped me feel compassion even when you didn't deserve it." He turned to look at her. "I'm not saying what you did was acceptable. It wasn't. But I learned to see the wounded person beneath the cruel words, and that made it possible to forgive even before you asked for forgiveness." Folasade was quiet, absorbing this. Then she said, "I want to be like you. I want to have that kind of wisdom, that kind of compassion." "You will," Adewale said. "But it takes time. It takes practice. It takes falling and getting up and falling again. The difference now is that you want to change. Before, you didn't even see that you needed to." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast African sky. Finally, Folasade spoke again. "Will you teach me?" she asked. "Will you teach me how to see people the way you see them? How to serve the way you serve? How to transform suffering into wisdom?" "We will teach each other," Adewale said. "I will teach you what I have learned about compassion and service. And you will teach me, what will you teach me, wife?" Folasade thought about it. "I will teach you that you don't have to bear everything alone. That accepting help is not weakness. That your wife can be your partner in service, not just someone you protect or provide for. I will teach you that vulnerability is strength, and that sharing your pain doesn't diminish your dignity." Adewale smiled. "Then we both have much to learn from each other. That is a good foundation for a marriage." As they prepared to retire for the night, Folasade paused at the doorway. "One more thing, husband." "Yes." "Thank you for waiting. For 7 days while I was at the colony, you waited here, not knowing if I would return changed or unchanged. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn, to grow, to become worthy of being your wife." "You were always worthy," Adewale said gently. "You just couldn't see it. Just as I was always worthy, even when my legs didn't work, even when you couldn't see it. We are all worthy, Folasade. That is the lesson. Every person, in every condition, with every limitation or ability, all worthy of dignity, respect, and love." 5 seasons later. The rainy season was ending, and the air smelled of fresh earth and new growth. In the compound of Adewale and Folasade, that newness was embodied in the twins who played in the courtyard, a boy and a girl, 3 seasons old, healthy and bright and full of the energy that makes parents both joyful and exhausted. The boy, named Olumide after the young man from the leper colony, was strong and active, running everywhere on sturdy legs. The girl, named Sade after Mama Sade, had been born with one leg shorter than the other, giving her a pronounced limp when she walked. Some of the villagers had whispered when Sade's condition became apparent. "The ancestors are punishing them still," they murmured. The mark on Folasade's hand was not enough. But those who knew the family well understood the truth. Folasade and Adewale loved both their children equally, completely. They neither pitied Sade nor praised Olumide for his wholeness. They taught both children that worth comes from character, not from ability. That dignity is inherent, not earned. That every person, with their unique combination of gifts and limitations, has something precious to offer the world. The compound had become known throughout the region as a place of learning and healing. People came to Adewale to have furniture and doors carved with beautiful proverbs. But they also came to seek advice, to share their struggles, to learn from a man who had transformed suffering into wisdom. And they came to Folasade, too. Women who struggled in their marriages, people who faced sudden affliction, parents who didn't know how to cope with a child born different, all came to the woman with the mark on her palm, knowing she would understand their trials because she had walked through her own. Folasade made regular visits to the leper colony, and she had convinced several other women from the village to join her. What had begun as her trial had become her calling, serving those society had cast aside, reminding them of their worth, advocating for their needs. The village itself had changed. Slowly, cautiously at first, but then with growing conviction, people began to interact differently with those who had afflictions. The leper colony was no longer a place of complete exile. Village members visited, brought food and supplies, and most importantly, brought the message that the afflicted were still part of the community, still valued, still seen. On this particular morning, as Folasade watched her children play, Amara approached. The young woman was no longer a maid but a companion and apprentice, learning the healing arts from Mama Agba and the spiritual wisdom from her grandmother's legacy that had finally fully awakened in her. "Ma," Amara said, "there is someone at the gate to see you. A young woman from the neighboring village. She says her husband was injured in a farming accident and can no longer use his arm. She says she doesn't know how to not be angry at him." Folasade looked at the mark on her palm, the dark flower that had become her constant reminder and her credential. She had helped so many people over these past seasons, sharing her story, offering the wisdom born from her own failure and redemption. "Tell her I will see her," Folasade said. "And Amara, prepare some of that calming tea. She will need it as she begins to confront the hardness in her own heart." As Amara went to bring the visitor, Adewale wheeled himself into the courtyard. Yes, wheeled. He had designed and built a chair with wheels that he could move himself, increasing his independence and mobility. It had inspired others in the village with similar limitations to create their own adaptations. "Another one?" he asked with a slight smile. "Another one," Folasade confirmed. "She is at the beginning of the path I walked. I remember how lost I felt, how angry, how trapped in my own disappointment. If I can help her avoid some of the suffering I caused both of us, then the ancestors' purpose in your trial becomes even clearer," Adewale said. "They broke you down not to destroy you but to remake you into someone who could help others. Your suffering has meaning now, purpose." "As does yours," Folasade said. "How many people have you helped with your story, your example, your refusal to let limitation define you?" Little Sade limped over to her father and climbed onto his lap with the unself-conscious ease of a child who has never been made to feel that her parents' inability to walk is shameful or strange. Olumide, following his sister, climbed onto Folasade's lap. For a moment, the four of them sat there, a family marked by limitation and by love, by suffering and by wisdom, by the past's pain and the present's grace. "Tell us the story, Mama," Olumide demanded. "Tell us the story of how the ancestors taught you to see." It was his favorite story, one Folasade had told many times. She never sugarcoated it, never hid her own cruelty or foolishness. She believed children could handle truth, especially when truth led to transformation. "Very well," Folasade said. "Once upon a time, there lived a woman who was beautiful on the outside but ugly on the inside. She had a husband whose legs didn't work, and instead of seeing his worth, she saw only his limitation." As she told the story, their story, Adewale listened, still moved by it despite having heard it countless times. The children listened with wide eyes, understanding more with each telling. And the young woman from the neighboring village, brought into the courtyard by Amara, stood at the edge and listened too. Listened to the story of a woman's fall and rise, of a man's forgiveness, of ancestors who teach through trials, of a community that learned to see with new eyes. When the story ended, the young woman was weeping. "That is my story too," she whispered. "I am that cruel wife. I am making my husband suffer for something that was not his fault. I am becoming the monster you became." Folasade stood and walked to her, holding out her marked palm. "Then let me show you the path I walked. It is not an easy path. It requires confronting the ugliest parts of yourself. But on the other side of that confrontation is freedom, and love, and the possibility of becoming who you were always meant to be." The young woman grasped Folasade's hand, and in that grasp was the beginning of her own transformation. The old griot who began this story shakes his rattle 3 times. Kpa, 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 signaling that the tale is ending. The children and adults gathered under the Iroko tree lean forward, not wanting the story to be over, but knowing that all stories must end so that life can continue. "And so," the griot says, his voice rich with the wisdom of many seasons, Folasade learned what the ancestors required her to learn. She learned that beauty is not in the body's perfection but in the spirit's compassion. She learned that worth is not measured in what we can do, but in who we choose to be. She learned that suffering, when met with humility, can transform us into vessels of wisdom and healing. He pauses, looking around at the gathered faces. And Adewale learned too. Learned that forgiveness is not weakness but the strongest form of love. Learned that his suffering had prepared him for purpose larger than he had imagined. Learned that limitation in one area often reveals gifts in others that might have remained forever hidden. The griot sets down his rattle and picks up a carved calabash, a replica of the one from the story, decorated with intricate patterns. This story is not just about one woman or one man or one marriage, he says. It is about all of us. We all carry marks, some visible on our skin, others hidden in our hearts. We all face the choice. Will we let our trials make us bitter or better? Will we let our suffering close our hearts or open them? Will we see only the surface of people or learn to see the divine spark within? He pours water from the calabash into a cup and drinks. The ancestors teach us through many methods, through blessings and trials, through joy and suffering, through the visible and the invisible. But always, they teach us the same fundamental truth. We are all connected. Your suffering is my suffering. Your healing is my healing. When we mock the afflicted, we mock the divine. When we honor the least among us, we honor the greatest. The griot stands, signaling that the story is truly ending now. Go from here with eyes that see beyond the surface. Go with hearts that hold compassion for all, especially those who are different, limited, struggling. Go with the understanding that every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about, and thus deserves your kindness. He raises the calabash. And remember Folasade's mark, the dark flower on her palm that reminded her every day to see truly, to judge kindly, to love deeply. We all need such marks, such reminders, such teachers to keep us from forgetting what truly matters. As the people prepare to disperse, returning to their homes and their lives, the griot speaks one final time. The elders say, "A tree is known by its fruit, not by its bark." Adewale's bark was damaged, but his fruit was sweet. Folasade's bark was beautiful, but her fruit was bitter, until the ancestors taught her to tend her inner garden with the same care she had given to her outer appearance. He smiles, and in his old eyes is the twinkle of one who knows that the best stories are those that continue to teach long after the telling ends. The ancestors bless you, he says. May you walk with dignity in whatever form your body takes. May you see with compassion whatever forms other bodies take. May you remember that we are all more than our limitations, more than our abilities, more than what the eye can see. We are spirits having a human experience, and that spirit, that eternal, divine spark, is the same in all of us. Ace. The people respond in unison. So may it be. And the story ends, but its teaching continues, rippling out through the village, through the seasons, through the generations. Children grow up hearing about the proud wife who was humbled and the patient husband who forgave. They learn to look beyond appearance. They learn that every person has worth. They learn that suffering, when transformed by wisdom, becomes a gift to be shared. In the compound of Adewale and Folasade, the lamps are lit against the night. The twins sleep peacefully in their room. Adewale carves another piece, his hands shaping wood into beauty. Folasade prepares the next day's lessons for the young woman she is teaching. And on her palm, the dark flower mark catches the lamplight, a permanent reminder of the most important journey of her life. The journey from pride to humility, from blindness to sight, from cruelty to compassion, from ugliness of spirit to true beauty of soul. The story is ended, but the teaching never ends. The ancestors watch, and they are pleased. What wisdom will you carry from this tale? In your own life, where might you be judging by appearance rather than seeing the spirit within? Who might you be dismissing or undervaluing because of how they look or what their body can or cannot do? Thank you for watching this video to the end. I am pretty sure you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting and beautiful stories lined for you already, so click on the image showing on your screen to watch the next one.